Thank you all for coming. I'm not going to introduce our speakers because they're all very well known. What I will do is I have their excerpts of their bios. As they answer my questions, I will flash those slides. So I apologize. I realize time is short. So we have sent them questions beforehand that they have seen. So I'm going to ask the first two questions, and they will start in any order they would like, and they will answer them. After the second question, the answer to the second question, I'll pause and wait for you guys to ask questions, hoping that those will be more interesting questions. If you don't come up with better questions, I'll move on to our third question and so on. Okay, so with that, the first question we posed to the panelists were, describe one major thing you wish you had done differently at the start of your career, and how did you recover from that mistake or surmounted it?
Okay, so it's not the question.
No, you can answer. I'll find you. Whichever. Do you want to answer?
All right, so okay, so I guess one mistake is to pick up the microphone first. But this is not happening in the beginning of my career, closer to the end, I'd say. Towards the beginning of my career, I used to think that I really didn't know anything, and everybody else knew everything, and that's the reason why conversations don't work out well. This made me extremely shy in interactions. I did not ask the questions that I should have asked. I used to sit around saying, if I ask a question, it's going to be a stupid question. Over time, I've realized that actually I wasn't as ignorant as I thought I was. I was probably as ignorant as the average person over there, and if I had asked those questions that I felt I should have asked, a lot of people would have benefited, not just me. So that's probably one good example of things that we wish we could do differently.
Well, I wasn't sure, what exactly to say here. I guess in terms of research things I wish I have done, the one thing that came in my mind was I was thinking I totally missed the interference alignment connection to storage. I understood there was a connection, but I didn't understand deeply the Kadambe-Jafar scheme, and then I missed that result. So I wish I had understood that paper more.
How did you surmount that mistake?
I did not surmount nothing. Well, I guess the one point there is that if one higher level message is, if you think there is a connection, like intuitively maybe it's worth getting into that correction in more depth if you believe that there's something there. So I definitely missed that one, even though I suspected that there is something.
I had actually an experience which is closer to what Madhu was describing. When I got to the US, originally it was just for 1 year, and I had by chance gotten some Fulbright. But when I applied, my application was a complete disaster to any of the schools. So of course I didn't get accepted to any of the schools I tried to apply. But by some chance I got then to WashU, which turned out to be great for me. But at the beginning I thought, when I landed first, it was all boarded up everywhere. I thought I'd just take the plane right back, back home to Austria. And so I didn't really have a lot of confidence, when I then came out. And by some chance, I got the job at Bell Labs. And I had a little bit the experience what Madhu was describing. I was sure that they would find out at some point that they had made a terrible mistake, right? And so I basically stayed in my office, and I had the good luck that there was Emra and Emina and all these other great people there. And at some point, Aaron Weiner told me that he had exactly the same experience as me. And I thought, well, if Aaron thinks like that, what chance do I have, right? So, but somehow it worked out, and so I think it goes a little bit towards what Madhu was saying.
Yeah. So I think my biggest mistake is different, but I'm going to add to what Ruediger and Madhu said. A few years ago, I was thinking to myself, and I said, I guess I'm not as stupid as I thought I was. So, I'm okay. I can survive this. So I think one of the biggest mistakes I made was I became an assistant professor, and shortly after I had my first kid. And then 3 years later, I had my second kid. And in between, for about 9 years, I didn't go to any ISITs. So I went to ISIT in 1998, and the next ISIT I went to was 2007. I was still publishing and sending papers, sending my students, but I personally did not go. And at the time, I thought it didn't matter. I was like too, cooped up with my kids, and it was always in the summer. We would go home to Turkey. But now looking back, I kind of realized that I missed an important opportunity to kind of keep up with my colleagues, continue networking, continue following. I would always ask my students, who did you meet? Did you say hi? Do they remember me? But looking back, remember me? So looking back, I think I should have, taken it more seriously.
Okay, so the second question we asked them was, what did you originally, can you name something that you thought originally was a career misstep, but it turned out to be a good one, or reversely, something that you thought it was a good decision, but it didn't turn out so good?
I can tell you one thing that I thought was a good idea that didn't. So I thought that this on interdisciplinary research, I guess, is one point of being careful about. So there was a hot new area, and I'm like, oh, I can try to come up with some new ideas in this hot new area, and I wrote a proposal, and then I quickly realized how tribal funding can be outside your actual area, and I very quickly learned that trying to do interdisciplinary research can be a very bad idea, and especially I think as when you're starting. So I think one point that I learned from that is if you're trying to do interdisciplinary research, you better have a collaborator who's an expert in the other area. Don't try to do it yourself because you'll quickly learn that they don't like that.
Else want to go next?
Okay, something random. When, about 10 years ago when Alon started ITA, somehow a year later on, he talked me into starting this entertainment session and so on, right? And so, I actually enjoyed it, right? But then at some point I went to ISIT and, I didn't quite attend as many talks as I should have, so I was typically standing around somewhere and there was a student coming up and we talked and he said his name and we talked and then I said my name. He said no, I know you, and of course I was very happy, right? And so but we talked some more, right? And then he told me about his research, and then I was going to say something about me, and then he somehow his eyes opened. He said, oh, you do research too. So at that point, I decided I should take it easy with entertainment sessions and maybe concentrate on other stuff.
Yeah. So I, started my PhD early 1990s, and I was working with Tom Kovar. So he had, two classes on information theory. One is the basic one, the other one multi-user. And I loved the multi-user part. This is, early 90s. Nobody was working on multi-user information theory. People had done a lot of work earlier, but they had stopped. But I loved it. And I kind of particularly loved the relay channel. So I said, I'm going to do this, I'm just going to find the capacity of the relay channel. And I would, work and, I would come to the office and say, I think I got it. And, Amos Lapidot was my office mate, and, he would say, we heard the rumors you got the relay channel. And I'm like, I think I got it. Of course I didn't. So, this went on for months and months. Then, after 6 months or a year of this, I said, this isn't going anywhere. This was my biggest career mistake. I'm just going to do something else. But then, flash forward maybe 5 to 10 years later, I kind of realized how important it was that I had read all the papers I read back then, when multi-user information theory came back. And I kind of had already studied those. Now, something that I thought was good and turned out bad was at some point, with my colleagues at Poly, we said, maybe we could build, I was working on cooperative networks, maybe we could build stuff. So, we wrote an NSF proposal, actually got a lot of money, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to build stuff. This is like going to be my career highlight. And then I think I went to the lab, after the second day, I said, you know what, maybe not. So, proving theorems is better.
So I'll mention one anecdotal event during my graduate student days, which probably gives you both the positive and the negative side of the story. As graduate students in computer science, we were all asked to, at some point or the other, present some research that we've done, and this should be a plan for roughly what your PhD is supposed to be about. Now, throughout my career, I've not been good at planning. I never think about the future, a little bit about the past, and mostly about today. And at this stage, you're supposed to come up with one research presentation, but as a backup, you're supposed to have a couple of other things that you could mention. No student till that time had ever been asked to present a second story on research. I went in, I had 3 members on my examination committee. I had some nice result published in Fox or Stock and saying, look, this is what we can do. I went in and described this result. And Karp, who's on the committee, he's a famous computer scientist, also who had worked on this problem in the past and knew that we'd made significant progress, looked at it and said, I don't think you're going to work on this in the future. So I was very shocked. And he said, do you have something else to say? So I presented something else, and I said, okay, look, this is it. This I'm going to work on. He said, I don't think you're going to make progress on this. It's pretty, nervous and shaking. And I said, okay, there's this problem. It's about polynomials, and really nothing's going to happen here. But I've done some research. He said, okay, that I believe, and he let me go. I didn't think for a moment that I'd be thinking about it, but the problem was about how to test polynomials. This is what I talked about today, and this is what I've been doing ever since over there. So it goes to tell you that, you can't really plan your career too hard. And at the same time, you can have, if you ever asked to predict what would you be doing in a year from now, you can be pretty grossly wrong.
Okay, so this was the end of the second question. So let's see if you guys can do better than us and come up with better questions. Go.
So what was your best career decision?
Are you asking anyone in particular?
All of you.
All of us.
So I can say something. Maybe. So I can tell you one thing that was, I think, So I was working on storage codes, and I wasn't working on specifically the repair problem. So I go for a coffee with a CS systems guy at Nefeli. Okay, and I have this new code that I think is useful for practice, and we have our coffee at Nefeli, and I keep telling him my thing. And he's like, yeah. And after like an hour, we're kind of done. We've done with the coffee, and I'm like, we're about the point to say, great, I'll send you my paper with email. Thanks a lot. See you later. At the point where it was kind of, he didn't really care about what I had this code. He didn't really care. So I'm like, at that point, I'm like, okay, why don't you tell me what you really care about? and then he tells me basically something that became the repair problem. So there was, I think the thing that was great that happened there is there was an efficient communication happening where I was trying to tell him I had the solution for a different thing, and then I'm okay, why don't we cut the crap at the end and just tell me what you would care about? And I was just, I guess, lucky that we had some actual communication, and then this turned out to be an interesting problem. But listening to the systems guys and effectively communicating was something that worked out well at this case. Yeah.
I don't actually have an answer to this, but I have something else. My motivation for coming here is because I wanted to hear Madhu tell me his 99 mistakes he made and then go out and make them myself.
And I wanted to come here to tell you all to not be like Rudy. All right, so I'd say, okay, you said what's the biggest important decision? And I don't recall making a decision. period. You know, I mean, yes, I've chosen to accept some positions in some places and so on, but other than that, really, in terms of choosing problems in research, I mean, it's not like the wizard chooses the wand, it's the wand that chooses the wizard. I mean, the problems chose me, it's not the other way around, I think. So you just keep exploring wherever you can, and sometimes you sort of find something interesting, and then you should jump on it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, again, it wasn't a conscious decision, but when I started my PhD, I was an electromagnetics person. So, you know, I had an advisor doing wave propagation in the ionosphere. So one of my friends said, you know, this isn't what you want to do. And I'm like, okay, so what do I want to do? He said, look, you know, I think you'll like this. And he gave me a draft of, you know, Cover and Thomas, wasn't published yet. And I kind of started turning the pages and, you know, theorem, proof, you know, I'm kind of trying to understand. I'm like, this is cool, yeah, you know, maybe this is what I'll do. And I guess that turned out to be the best thing, you know, not a conscious decision.
What's something you mistakenly thought would be very easy?
You want all of them? Or about 10 ideas in a day that are usually easy. Oh, sorry.
Get tenure.
Any other question?
Have you ever successfully cured yourself of a bad habit?
Never.
Have you tried and never?
No, why would I?
I have a cure for bad habits, which is to change your definition of what's a bad habit. I mean, I can never read papers, and by now I've sort of found out that, you know, I proved that interaction is much more important, and so I ask my students to read the papers and explain it to me. So each habit has a cure, which is probably not by curing yourselves.
Anything else? Any Elza or Alex?
I don't have bad habits.
Aditya, is that you?
So actually this is related to what you were asking. Such as we do reading and then we actively work on problems and stuff. So do you think there's a balance, and what is your balance? Is there a balance you should try to maintain between trying to read stuff, trying to do stuff by yourself, or trying to figure it out?
You know, when I try to work on a problem, I always avoid reading something in the beginning, at least for a while. And I think that, to me, that's nice. Of course, you know, you make all the same mistakes and so on, but I think if you start reading right away for a problem, you know, particular problem that has been out there for a long while, you're very likely just follow exactly what has been done, and then I think you're following the same patterns, and presumably they haven't led to, you know, further progress. Otherwise, the problem wouldn't be there. So at least for a long time, I try to avoid reading. Of course, you know, also has its downsides, and I do a little bit like Madhu. Maybe someone else can read things, and then you can, you know, can interact. But I think the longer you can keep your mind from looking afresh, I think the better.
I have a question. What's the best advice you heard from someone for your career?
So when I was about to, the question was, what's the best advice you've ever had on your career? When I was working towards my PhD thesis, there was a moment of personal crisis for me where this was just a few weeks before the PCP theorem, which was a pretty big result, and once we had it, there was no further crisis. But before that, it was not clear where we should be heading. And there was some result that we were trying to get to, and we got scooped by some other group of people who were working on the problem, and they managed to get, you know, the results that we cared about. And my advisor told me that, look, you were thinking about this question differently than these people are. You should continue to think about that question in your language and express all the questions and answers and your understanding in your own language, and just write the thesis like that. That was going to be my thesis. And it was a great piece of advice because it was somehow related to the PCP theorem. I started writing these things, and then along the way came nice new ideas and so on. You have to work on your strengths. And this was something that told me that I should think the way I was thinking and build on it and write about it. And so it's allowed me to build on my strengths. So I'm really, really grateful to my advisor for this one piece of advice.
So I have something that so when I was an undergrad and I was trying to decide sort of what to do for my undergraduate thesis, and which would sort of guide the area I would get into, and there was like signal processing and communications and electromagnetics and this and that, and I did not know what these things meant very well, and what had future and what didn't. They told me, and like a friend told me, and that was, I think, a very good advice, is don't try to understand the topic, don't choose the topic, but rather choose a person. So I could tell which professors were like better at teaching. I could tell perhaps which professors I clicked more. So I ended up choosing more by finding a professor in Greece that I felt was a good professor, and he happened to be doing, signal processing and communications. So that was I think a good advice. And I think when you're clueless, as I was, about what these things mean, it's easier to choose a person than to choose a topic.
When I tried to, I was at WashU and my advisor was Pixie Rimoldi, and whenever we had some first results, we would be very excited, write it up. And Pixio was a real pain when it came to, writing down the results. But every single line he would make me rewrite. And, typically we had these games where I didn't want to do it, so I would just pretend I did it, I give it back to him, and he said, but didn't I tell you at some point, so this didn't work. But, at the end, I think it taught me that, I'm not pretending I write particularly well, but I think that it's very important to go through this process and to exposit your ideas as simply and as nicely as you can. I think, that to me at the end is something very important. And that's what I learned from Pixie. I guess.
A question behind.
All right. So I'm older than anybody here in the panel, so let me give you my piece of wisdom, and then I'll also give you Paul Krugman's piece of wisdom. So my two pieces of wisdom is that there are two things in life that are usually pretty bad, but when you're a researcher, actually they are good. One is attention deficit disorder. It's good to have that because with that you go from topic to topic. Your research does not become stale, and it's always good to have new enthusiasm because you are going from one flower to another flower, and that's always good. And the other one is to be lazy. Usually I don't recommend to my daughter to be lazy, but to my and I don't recommend that to my graduate students either. but I will recommend it to you. And okay, so let me elaborate, right? The thing is that if you get into problems that are very, very messy and they require, a lot of work for what you actually accomplish, that's, it's kind of spinning your wheels is something that you should always avoid. So, but we are very lucky in information theory, because in information theory, there are so many nice, cute problems that, are both mathematically challenging and technologically relevant, but yet they are the proofs. You can find elegant proofs, you can find elegant statements, and so on, things that are appealing to a wide audience. So, okay, so those are my two pieces of advice. Now let me give you Paul Krugman's. This actually, you can Google it. So if you Google Paul Krugman, rules for research. So he has 4 rules that are very catchy. The first rule is listen to the Gentiles, okay? So what this means is, in fact, what Alex Dimakis was saying. It's very useful to talk to people that are not in your immediate circle. because that's going to give you a lot of ideas. And even if people that are not in your circle and you don't consider your intellectual peers, maybe they are working on computer engineering or things like that. They are, in the totem pole, yeah, definitely in the pecking order are going to be way lower than information theory. Second is question the question, okay? So question the question in the sense that sometimes people are looking and trying to get some results on something, and maybe if you get an epsilon outside that, you step back and you say, well, maybe the problem is actually easier if you look at it in a certain way. Or, sometimes if you make the problem more general, it becomes easier, which is funny, but in fact, it is, because sometimes if you have less structure that you can work with, then it forces you to actually work only on the fundamentals of the problem and throw away what is not necessary. And of course, Shannon was a great example of that. So Krugman's third rule is dare to be silly. Dare to be silly. So I guess what he means there is that sometimes, to do something important, you don't really have to write a 45-page paper. It could be a 2-page paper that may sound very simplistic, but in fact is very good stuff. And the fourth rule is simplify, simplify. Okay, so in this case, we're preaching to the choir, right? We all know that that is the way to go. The toy model, we are in the world of the toy model, and that's really how we learn, by making very unrealistic assumptions, trying not to put everything that is relevant to the problem together, and binary erasure channel, binary symmetric channel, AWGN, that's where we learn the stuff. And of course, this phone works with a channel that is very far from any of those, but it works. And it works because, coding theorists have developed codes for the channels that we understand, not for the real channels. So that's my 2 pieces.
So what would the panelists advise the younger people here, the younger faculty members, with regard to getting involved, taking on administrative duties, university, and maybe not just for people in academia, but in terms of getting involved in IT society activities as a young person?
I'm full of admiration for people who are willing to take on these responsibilities. I think they're great. I was going to say that, if I had never done this, organizing a conference of this scale would have been the biggest career mistake in my life. But I'm really full of admiration for people who can do it. All right, more seriously, I think in academia and in general in research, we are better off taking control of our own destiny. So to the extent that we can find amongst us people who can step up and take responsibility, it's very important, because if not, you'll find people from the publishing house who want to publish your journals for a profit. You'll find people from other departments who will say, look, let's keep you as a small portion of our department. You really need to find people who can step up and speak for us, represent us, and do well for us. And I think any stage we can do more of this, it's very, very, very valuable. Our community, to me, I'm a theoretical computer scientist. I really think of theoretical computer science as my first allegiance and go by it. And I would really recommend it for many of you. Your academic institution, et cetera, are all probably secondary to this. This is your lifeblood. This is where you're going to get all your intellectual excitement from, and this is where you're going to put all your intellectual output into.
Yeah, so as a young junior faculty member, I didn't do much service. I participated in the IT things a little bit, not too much. And I think the short piece is I probably advise most younger people to do a little bit, but not too much. So I think it's important to help, but I think most of us as junior faculty members have so many other things to worry about that, keep it, take it easy, I think. Well, that would be my short but true, honest advice.
Maybe not until tenure. But I think, administrative stuff at your own institutions, that's a kind of, that I think of it, if you do it early on, and that's a different career path, but being involved in information theory activities is, I find them very rewarding. I kind of get to interact with my peers, with more senior colleagues. That's how I met Dan, I was the publications chair, he was the general chair of IT workshop, and, I think it was a great experience. So, if you like it, society really appreciates it, and there are a lot of rewards to be gained, personal and networking as well.
I think it can be actually a lot of fun and rewarding. Just try to keep it maybe over short bursts rather than long things, and check once in a while. If you see somebody using PowerPoint, maybe it's time to to go back. But I think through a career, right? If you think of 40 years, it's unlikely that over the whole 40 years you constantly be equally excited about everything, right? And so once in a while, maybe you need a little bit of change in perspective, and maybe if there's something you can do and it takes a few months to do, and you can do something, it can be a very positive experience and might refresh your mind, and maybe you recover again, and then you go on and do again something else, right?
Is it more rewarding to work with your students, with your peers, or with your mentors?
Or with us?
Okay, my personal answer to that would be, look, quite often working with your peers is much more quicker. You want to solve a particular problem, maybe this will happen much quicker. When you want to learn things which is not focused and directed, by far working with my students has been the most enlightening experience for me. So, and working with my mentors, I mean, they are hiding from me even now.
Yeah, I mean, rewarding was the question, right? So rewarding, rewarding is with students, right? So, if you want to, quick is with peers. So yeah, I completely agree.
I think depends on how you define reward, If you work with your peers or your mentors, maybe you write more papers, But working with students, it's, especially with good students, seeing them grow is a big reward, and being able to interact with them, and as Madhu said, learning through them is priceless.
I would say more fun is with students, because typically what I'm doing is, when I work with students, I'll try to do a lot of bets with them, and then we would bet whoever loses then has to make cappuccino for the next week, whenever, and I always make sure that I win. Okay, and I don't think you could do this with colleagues. So.
So I guess our honorary panelist won.
So I think there is a worrisome trend, and is that a lot of people get their PhD and become, or maybe they do a postdoc, they become professors, and then all the papers they write henceforth are really with their students. And their students are the senior authors. And in many cases, the advisor takes a very passive role. So, if we go back in time, say we go back to the 1950s, people were writing a lot of single author papers there then. And, take the case of Claude Shannon. He was very famous already when he was 32, and for the next 10 years, all his papers were, or most of his papers were single author. So it's much harder, of course, but there is also a big reward and self-reward, in the sense that you are very proud of something that has only your name there. So I wish that, this trend, maybe we could reverse the trend of, and of course a good way to reverse this trend is for people maybe not to have only single author, but to work with peers, to work with people in other institutions or people in their own institution, other professors in their own institution, and so on. But to rely only on students is something that is a necessity when you work on fields that are experimental fields, but it's certainly not a necessity when you work in applied mathematics like we do.
In fact, that would be my answer to the question of best advice I have received, that I think Sergio very early on once told me, just have one thing that you're working on your own on it. So I think it's been really healthy, not that you make progress as fast as you're doing it with students. So, any more questions?
What's your advice to make a good balance between life and research?
What life?
What do you mean?
Essentially, when we do research, I mean, from time to time there are problems and we want to work spiking. So we are really interested, we are really emotional about some topic and we want to spend all the time to work on that topic maybe for 1 week, maybe for 1 month. But essentially it is not possible when there are people around you that we need attention and stuff like this. I want to know what is your personal experience.
Tough.
So I would say that the question was, how do you sort of strike a balance between personal lives and constraints and research and professional life, right, roughly? I would say this is a very personal question, and there cannot be a single uniform answer for every one of us. So each person really has to make this judgment call on their own, based on their own circumstances and their own thing, and each answer can be right here. And by the way, this could be the universal answer to every question you ask.
Well, I'm waiting for. Yeah, I'm waiting for the.
Rudy looks like
His thing is ready.
I don't know, move to Switzerland, you don't have to worry about funding. It just works for me.
How much time do you spend on very big problems?
That's a good one.
Long-standing lectures. On average, I mean.
Okay, so what, for example, I'm in a very fortunate situation that in Switzerland we really don't have to worry about. I could spend a year on some problem and nothing comes out. I'll still have a job and I still have students, because we have a very nice infrastructure, right? I think that security that you can do that is worth a lot, right? Because it gives you the opportunity to think long term and not have to worry that you have to have a paper for that conference and that conference, right? And so not very often, but once in a while, I really try to, think a particular problem and then maybe give myself half a year to see if I can make some progress, right? But I think there my advice would be that if you do that, then always think of a few maybe small side projects. I've several times got stuck and then you get completely frustrated. And so I think it's always good to have something else also on the side that you can work on where you can make progress. And this could be teaching or could be something else, right? Because it's very easy to get stuck in something, become completely frustrated, and then you don't want to be in that place either.
Are you hiring?
Yeah, so one thing related to that. So I wasted a lot of time thinking about things that didn't go anywhere often. I think it depends. I mean, if you have tenure and you're in Switzerland, maybe you have more. You can spend more time. As a student, I think it's better to have maybe 2 or 3 things that you're doing in parallel. Some maybe safer than others. Having some threads that you continue to work on, and maybe you can pursue something more fancy every now and then. But I think it's a very high risk strategy to say, oh, I'm just pursuing this big open problem, because it may work or it may not. But yeah, so I think it's better to have a few, like diversify a little bit and to have a safer side too, as a student or maybe as a junior faculty member.
How often you switch the topics of this equation, if you can tell that?
Topics of what?
Concentration, like you're thinking about.
Oh, on what you're concentrating.
Oh. Sometimes these topics, such as, go from DFC to region changes, big changes. How would you do that?
Yeah, so I think there's many different styles of researchers. So some people are more like theory builders who will just have one thing where they work forever, and some people like me who have ADD, you know, and I think Sergio said that. So I definitely, like, you know, somebody walks in, like a student says, oh, I read this paper in machine learning or in theoretical computer science or in anything, and then I try to do something. Most of the time nothing happens, but I will usually, I context switch a lot. But I think it depends a lot on the personality and also the stage of the stage in one's career. I think as a student, it's better not to jump around too much. I did, but I think it's better not to jump too much. There's an optimal amount of jumping. I think that depends also on the personality and the environment and everything else.
Yeah, I think I've always worked on exactly the same topic for my whole career, so maybe I might not do the same. But I guess, you know, one is topics, the other one is also methods, of course, right? I mean, you want to have some changes, and, you know, it could be whether or not, you know, it's the same topic, but perhaps there are influences that come from different things. In my case, you know, was maybe more first algebraic, then it was more probabilistic, there's polar things, then there's maybe statistical physics that's come in, and so these are kind of things that, you know, have kept me interested, and that has kept it, at least for me, interesting.
One more question, and then there's a discussion.
Should you work on something you think is interesting, work on something different?
One question.
He said the question, I guess, was if you should work on something that you think is interesting, or if you should work on something that other people are interested. Good question.
You know, I think we, as much as we like to complain about, you know, funding and, you know, being promoted, I think we have a lot of flexibility. And I personally think, you know, as a student, as a faculty member, or as a researcher, we have the best job in the world, because, you know, we come up with problems, you know, we solve them, and then we get paid to do that. So, and I would say just work on what you find interesting. Of course, you know, don't be blind to everything else, but if something interests you, then, you know, you'll spend more time, you'll have more fun, and if somebody's paying, just why not?
I think it depends if you have good taste in research.
Exactly. I would say, by and large, I mean, it's your taste in research that makes you a researcher. Problem-solving skills can take you up to a certain distance, and beyond that, I think it's really what you pick as problems that determines you. You can pick problems because someone else recommended it, and lots of people are thinking about it, but at the end, you have to appreciate the problem first, and then you go around making progress.
Let's thank the panelists.